Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Brian Jepson. I'm one of the people that helps put on this event. I also am on the board of the organization that we just mentioned, AS220, AS220.org. And I'm here with Bert Crenca, who's the founder. And tell me your title again.
Well, it's a working title. I used to be the artistic director. I just handed off that role, but my working title right now is plenipotentiary. It's a word that hasn't been really used actively since the 17th century, I think.
Are you gonna?
You want to know what it means?
Yes.
Yeah, we kind of do.
Plenipotentiary means an ambassador to a country that can act on behalf of its country without seeking permission. So that title's not going to last.
No. All right, Bert. I'm gonna. You know, if people are flipping through pictures, they're gonna get an idea what AS220 is about. I got some questions here that are gonna lead us up to what AS220 is today, because I do want to go back to the past. About a year before I wandered in and met you two when I was a young punk. It was like 30 years ago, I think. Well, so I just answered that question, sort of. When did you start AS220? And when you started it, what was the purpose?
Absolutely. Yeah, I get it. So we started AS220 in 1985 with $800 in a completely non-functioning building that was essentially boarded up in a city that was also essentially boarded up. This is Providence, Rhode Island. And Providence, Rhode Island, over the last 30 years or so, has gone through a tremendous renaissance. And sort of the art and culture piece of that has been a big driver in the sort of reimagining of the city and the renaissance that's going on there.
So the other part of the question was, what was the purpose? Why did what were you going to have happen there?
There were a series of events that led up to the creation of AS220. I had done an exhibit in 1983, 82, 83, which was my sort of coming out party as an artist. Again, the city and the art community was very disparate. It was not really connected. Everybody wanted to get out of Providence. And I did this show. I also was going through a sort of big changes in my life. I was getting divorced, and as I say, I was dematerializing. And my intention was to rematerialize as 100% artist. And here's my big coming out party. And the show got completely and intensely panned by the local paper. And so this was an amazing blow, because I really thought I was the second coming of Picasso or whatever. And as a result of the panning, a lot of artists came to the show. And it particularly mentioned the political nature of the work. As a result of that, one of the artists, who was a poet, wrote a critique of the reviewer. And the paper published that. So now there's this dialogue going on in the newspaper. As a result of that, a lot more artists came. So we started talking, and we started convening in my house, and we wrote a manifesto. And that manifesto essentially trashed everything in the art world as it is, as being elitist, as primarily being supporting of kind of Western European ideals, and that, in fact, we had really lost, really kind of lost touch with the real value and the intrinsic value of artistic practice and creative practice, and we had lost touch with the kind of value that artists, now I have to go slash makers, but in them days we just talked about artists, and when I mean artists, I mean all artists, musicians, dancers, whatever. And we had really lost touch with the intrinsic value of artists and artistic practice. You know, I think Mayakovsky says it really well, the Russian poet, when he says, art is not a mirror to the soul, but a hammer with which to shape it. And I think that's kind of the premise that we were working under. So you got another question?
Yeah, I do. I got another question, Bert. So you had space. How big were you when you started? How did you originally utilize the space? How'd you program it? What'd you do there? And then the follow-up question is, I want you to segue into how big you are today, and without taking up the whole rest of the time, tell me what goes on in that space now.
I did it in 5 minutes yesterday. I can do it in 2 today, right? So
back in time.
we literally started, I had $800 left in my name. I was washing dishes in a family restaurant. I'd had many jobs before that, but I wanted a job that actually didn't interfere with what I wanted to do. Dishes is a nice job, right? The dirty dishes and then clean dishes. Nice, simple. And I took that $800 and I rented a space in the downtown on the second floor of a building that was completely non-functioning at the time. It had no water, no heat, no nothing. And the whole concept was to create an unjuried, uncensored environment for anybody and everybody. So basically opening up a door and suggesting that anybody could do whatever they want, which sounds like a scary proposition. And we can get into that because, in fact, in 30-something years, the amount of controversy that has happened at AS220 has been so minimal, it's not even worth noting, in spite of the fact that there's been some pretty risque kinds of things that have happened in that space. We do over 800 performances in the course of a year. And that was the idea. But we also needed a place to live. So a bunch of us moved in. So we were living there. So it became a living community of artists. And, you know, we had to get the water running. We had to get the electricity. We did this all without inspectors or anything. So we hacked the space, right? And we hacked the entire system because we bypassed code officials, zoning, building, and everything else. And basically, initially, it was really a bunch of artists living there, a gallery and a performance space. Anybody that came to see me, we just booked them. It didn't matter what they were doing. Eventually, we imposed an original policy because BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC licensed agencies started knocking on our door, even though we're in illegal space. They were writing reviews of shows we were doing. That's how the city eventually discovered us. They started reading reviews when, like, Green Day played in our place. And they read a review, and they said, who the hell are these people? They ain't got no permits or licenses, right? But that's how we started. And it was truly open. Now, it's still open. The problem is that the demand on who we are now is unbelievable. So our 4 galleries is a 4-year waiting list. All of our performances are booked 4 to 6 months in advance, and we do multiple events every day. By the way, we also have a fab lab, print shop, media lab, and because of Brian and a few other nerds who felt welcomed in the environment, they said, we need a hacker space. So we dedicated a little office and bought a couple of soldering irons, and that led to eventually what became a fab lab. I remember when Brian and Sean Wallace drove me out to North Kingston, 20 miles away from Providence, and said, we got to show you something. And they sat me in front of a computer and said, we want to introduce you to the World Wide Web. And I was standing in front of this computer with my mind completely and totally blown, trying to understand the implications of what all this meant. But I think when you create a nurturing environment that is welcoming to people, anything and everything is possible, and you don't have to worry about predicting where it's going to come from. It'll come from someplace. Today, we're a multi-million-dollar organization that employs about 50 people. We renovated 3 derelict buildings in downtown, which represent 100,000 square feet of space. They're 100% occupied. 58 artists live in our buildings in affordable live-work studio spaces. We have a youth program that provides recording studios, access to the maker space, access to the print shop, dark room facilities, painting studios. We work inside and outside of the juvenile detention facility. We believe we're the longest running arts program inside a juvenile detention facility in the country, the longest continuous running program. We have our own restaurant and bar. We work with local food providers. We have other commercial tenants, but they're all local businesses, no chains. We've helped sort of raise their profile by working with them for the design of their spaces and things like that. We have a few other nonprofits. One is a college access program. What am I forgetting, Susan? What am I forgetting? We have Black Box Theater, a main stage performance space, a psychic room. So, yeah, residency. Go ahead.
So you touched on some of the maker space type parts of this, where AS220 is not just a space to serve, you know, a certain group of artists who, you know, it's not just for people who live there. There's open access to some of these things. You've got the dark room, you've got the print shop, and you got the fab lab. How does the access model work? I know it changes from time to time. Sometimes there's a membership, and you can also just pay by the hour, is that right? So tell me a bit about how somebody who wants to use the tools, the equipment, how do they get access to it?
Okay. And some of the programs are more active than others, and some of them are less challenging than others in terms of getting people engaged. But there's a membership program where people can become an annual member. They pay a monthly fee. They meet every month. They give input onto what should happen in the programs. You can take one-off classes on any of the tools and equipment that we have, and then you can rent time on those tools. There are people that have been running business off our little laser cutter, develop business, jewelry business, online jewelry business. I mean, we all know how this works, right? So there's a variety of access points. We try to introduce our youth to the program. I will tell you, with the particular population, and I mean really truly marginalized kids, the print shop is the most popular, the painting and the recording studio. And why is that? Because they see an immediate value and return to them with that. They create their own little brands, they make some T-shirts and hats, or they're printing their label for their I shouldn't say that, but for their, their rap CD or something like that. So, and I have to say, it's much more challenging to engage them with some of the technology that's being showcased here, because for them, the learning curve and the return, that distance is not, it makes it really challenging, particularly for the youth that we work with. And I want to be really honest about that, because I think in all of the work that we're doing, that's a real challenge. We can talk about the democratization of these tools and desktop fabrication and all that stuff, but really truly engagement, and particularly in communities that don't have a history of opportunity with this kind of thing, or are getting the exposure in school, in the public school system, something like that, we really have to be honest with ourselves about what that challenge represents and how we're going to sort of really truly make this stuff democratized, and accessible. So, I don't know what else.
All right. So you talked a bit about how the industries and the youth have intersected. There have been programs, photographic memory, is that the one? Where that turned into business opportunities or work opportunities for the youth. Talk a little bit about you. Then you talked about CDs.
Oh, sure.
But these were kids doing professional photo shoots, right?
Well, it's happening in a number of the disciplines. It's happened where the photo program, where we were going out and doing commissions and the kids were getting paid and earning some revenue. It's happened with our painting program, where our kids have done any number of murals. They designed a bus and wrapped the bus. They've designed bus stations, bus stops, their original designs, work with the Department of Transportation and others to make this stuff happen. So, there's always, I think, a push and a pull in organizations like ours when we're talking about access to tools and knowledge and stuff. The earned revenue opportunities that exist there, I think, are important. At the same time, they can also talk the mission. If you put too much emphasis on raising money, then it can actually begin to sort of limit access and create a kind of tension. So this is something that we struggle with, and we're always trying to balance the earned revenue opportunities with the tools and the resources we have against the true access and putting more emphasis on the teaching and providing access to those tools. So, but there are a lot of earned income sort of efforts that we do, and we also modern device is another one. So
Right. Modern Device is the AS220 itself is a nonprofit, and now Modern Device is, but before then, Modern Device was a privately owned, small, open source hardware manufacturer that has been brought into the nonprofit, and that would probably take like a whole other half hour to talk about. So when I think back to when I think about what AS220 makes, one of the things you make, not from the ground up, but you make is build, or we make, since I'm on your board, is buildings.
don't forget that. Yeah, building.
You make buildings. What was it, the early 1990s? When I was conveniently living in New York City, so I didn't have to do any work. You guys all had dust masks and sledgehammers, and you renovated the building that you bought, you got. And that's another thing that could take a little while to talk about. What I actually want to ask you is, you've done this for 3 buildings, you got 2 more in the queue. There must be other people that want you to come and explain how you did that. And what I'm curious about is where you've planted seeds with this type of knowledge and what the outcomes have been.
So we are another earned revenue stream, right? So now you have knowledge. So who's willing to pay for it, right? So we have a thing called Practice, which is a kind of consultancy program. We also have what we call an immersion program, where twice a year people apply to come to stay with us for 4 days and learn everything about our history and our practice, both the challenges and the successes. And also, we're being sought out all over the country and parts of the world. So I've been asked to speak. I believe we work in communities, either with organizations that are trying to get started, from individual artists all the way to city planning departments. And some of the places that we've worked is like Crosstown Arts in Memphis, Tennessee, I've been asked to work on charrettes in Solville, Memphis, to think about how art and culture and making can sort of help to reanimate communities that are struggling. Most recently, I'm currently working out in Los Angeles with an organization called Self-Help Graphics that's been around for 70 years in East LA, and really is at the battlefront in terms of gentrification and these kinds of issues. I think it's, there was a thing called white flight once, right, where everybody moved out to the suburbs because they wanted to have their single-family home and their microwave oven. And guess what? Cities are getting popular again, and now everybody wants to move back in. Well, there's people living there, So I think these are also some of the changes. And I think that these kinds of spaces that are empowering to communities not only have to be maker spaces, but I also think they have to be spaces to convene, to have conversations, to be pushing back, to challenge a lot of the things that are going on in our cities right now, and making sure that social access and social equity is part of the conversation as we begin to reinvent our urban cores. So this is a large part of the work that I'm invested in, and a lot of the work that I'm asked to speak to outside our community. So.
Perfect timing, because we have about 4 minutes left, and I wanted to open it up to questions, and we got one back there.
Yeah, particularly DC, we really are struggling with gentrification as an issue affecting a lot of different people. One thing that's happening, I guess I'm curious about how you would recommend to pursue creating a community space in a city where real estate is so ridiculously expensive at this point. And finding a building, like, it's really cool, I love that story, but we can't, I don't know how to.
Couldn't do it in downtown Providence again, okay? Because every square foot is spoken for. And it's very ironic that you asked, because I did a talk at Brown University about 3 weeks ago, and there was a young man there who graduated from Brown who lives in Washington, D.C., and is on the verge of buying a space right now, and it's got some people who are willing to invest, and he wants to come talk to me to figure out how to get this all done. So you're absolutely right. I think it's a huge, 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 huge challenge, and I think the existent sort of indigenous communities of areas, towns, neighborhoods, whatever, there has to be some level of organizing and self-empowerment. I think that this whole maker movement and this whole idea of, these catchphrases, right? Creative placemaking, all of these kinds of terms that have become very popular. But I think what we need to do is start getting the artists and the community organizers, and we have to go back to some 60s style organizing, and there's some amazing organizations that are doing this work. There's an organization in Memphis called Community Lift. There's an organization in Los Angeles called Learn, L-U-R-N. So there are organizations that are popping up now that are really beginning to merge these two efforts in a way where there's a community voice. But, a lot of this has to come up from neighborhoods and communities, because you can't drop in and tell a community what to do, right? You can't help organize them and advise them and bring best practice to them around organizing and making stuff happen. But we also have to take some responsibility for ourselves to make noise,
We probably have time for one more question, and then we can step out into the hallway, because we got another speaker coming on in a few minutes.
I run a makerspace in my library, and I wanted to know, what do you do as far as, I want to get the kids to use the materials that I have, but I also need to replenish if they use them. So I'm walking a tight line of, do I start charging them to use the materials and the tools, or do I just try and find an outside source to fund?
I think we do a little bit of
do
both.
both.
We do both. Like, so for do you want me to field the question?
go ahead.
So for the vacuformer, for example, Rhode Island, we still have a pretty good, strong jewelry industry, maybe not quite as strong, but I remember the time that these rolls and rolls of flocked plastic, remember that showed up in the lab, the stuff that you'd set a piece of jewelry, a ring in, and there was tons of that, right? So that was no problem. But my recollection is that when somebody books time on a device where there are consumables involved, that is factored, there is a charge for anything consumable. I'm not sure how much we figured out things like the laser cutter, which, you know, you've got filters over time, but both is good. If stuff's available, I don't think you need to spend your time, I don't think you need to spend fundraising time trying to get in-kind stuff. Save that for money. If somebody's got a whole bunch of material, like wood, cardboard is great, but 3D printer, filament, I think, do you agree
And
with this?
donations. I mean,
Yeah.
we've had a lot of donations. We did a wonderful middle school project where they built they cut the pipes and tuned them, and they made a wheel that you could change the pegs, and it would turn a hammer. So it was all made out of cardboard and some tubing, and we had most of the materials were donated to us. And the kids didn't even know what they were making until it was finished, and then we did a concert, and they could program each of these little, what do you call it? There's a name for this, but a music box,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
sort of thing, you know?
So let's wrap up because we got another speaker coming on. We'll be out in the hallway if folks want to talk. I do want to warn about one thing. Donations of 3D printer filament, if it's PLA, just don't do it because that stuff really needs to be kept, you know, away from humidity, and you will be fighting with your printer all day because it's going to be swollen and it's going to be jamming. It's better to pass that through to the people using it, and don't be afraid. Sometimes, you know, you've got a roll of filament that's been sitting out on the counter for a month or two, depending on your climate. You know, Rhode Island can get very humid where we are, and sometimes we just have to throw it away. Mark DeVink, you agree with that? You're the 3D printer guru that back there. All right, it's always tragedy when I have to get rid of filament because, you know, the price adds up. But once it goes bad, it ain't worth it. Thanks, everybody. We'll be hanging out there. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you for coming.